Hi. Let's talk a little bit about about activating groups. Activating groups. And if you're taking biochemistry, you've certainly taken organic already. And technically, you've already seen activating groups. You may not have called them activating groups, but you sure have seen them. And what I want to show you is that you're really not learning anything new. You're just changing what the activating group is. So before we get into the biochemistry, I want to show you a corollary. And actually, if you're taking the MCAT, this is actually probably some good practice. So let's say I have this molecule. Let's say I have a carboxylate. And let's say I want to take that ultimately to, I don't know, let's say I want to take I want to take acetate to acetamide, right? Acetate to acetamide. And if I asked you to do that in one step, what would your answer be? Could you do that in one step? And you should say, no, you can't do that in one step. And to understand why that is, we need to look at the stability of carboxylic acids and their derivatives. So if we look at the stability, right, the most unstable are your acyl halides, right? And then slowly getting more stable are your anhydrides. And then you have your esters, and then your amides. And then at the bottom you have your carboxylic acids, okay? This is sort of your hierarchy for stability. Carboxylic acids are fairly stable. In fact, they're more stable than amides. So if you were to think about the free energy change going from something, for instance, let me come over here. Come on. Come over here. And if I'm to draw sort of a free energy scale, right? So here's delta G over here, right? If I start with something that's really stable, low in free energy, right? And I end with something that's a little bit higher, my reaction coordinate is going to look like this, right? So is my delta G going to be positive or negative? Well, my delta G, it's going to be something higher minus something that's less. So it's going to be a positive delta G, something that's non-spontaneous. So it's not so if you were to put that carboxylate in there, or really in organic, typically they'll draw it with the proton on it, but whatever. If you have a carboxylate and I put in some ammonia in there, this is not going to happen. This reaction is not going to happen. In fact, what would happen is it would actually run the reverse direction. So you can't do this in one step. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go through an intermediate step. And what you're going to do is you would typically use something called thionyl chloride, of course with some pyridine in there, and you would get something that looks like this. In fact, you would end up losing water in this case, but you'd end up with this. You'd end up with acetyl chloride. And then from there, you could put in some ammonia, and you'd end up getting that, right? So what did I do? Well, I made an acyl chloride or an acyl halide, and then I went to the amide. Well, why did I do that? Well, there isn't a good way to get straight from the carboxylate to the amide because of the stability. You're going to something that's less stable. That's a relatively difficult thing to do, especially when you don't have an enzyme present, right? So if I have a good way to raise something in energy with a pretty good yield, I want to raise it up in energy, and then the rest of it's kind of just coasting down the hill, right? So if I was to draw a coordinate diagram with this, it would look something like this, right? So I start with something that's, around here, and I have a good way to raise it up in energy. I'll be honest, I have a good way to raise it up in energy. Okay, and so this right here, this would be the thionyl chloride. This would be that right there, right? And then I can get it to the amide. And this, of course, would be the amide right there. So, kind of looks like the Arby's hat. Anyways, so I have a way to get it up in energy, and then I can get it to the amide. So it turns out that you can't do that in one step. You got to do it in multiple steps. And actually, if you wanted to make any other carboxylic acid derivative, you would always go through this step. And if you remember from your organic 2 days, you used thionyl chloride a lot, and that you used it to activate a carboxylic acid. Well, it turns out that in biochemistry, you do a very, very similar thing. And what I want to do is I want to look at a reaction, at least part of a reaction. And we're actually going to look at this reaction in later videos, but I want to at least explore it now. Okay. So let's say I have a carboxylic acid, right? And actually, this is actually a fatty acid. And let's say I'm going to go to this. So I have this. Scroll over a little bit so I have some room. And what you'll find is that what I'm drawing is an activating group. Okay, so what did I do? Well, I have my fatty acid component, right? That's this guy right here. That's the fatty acid component. And then the whole rest of this molecule is AMP. And it turns out that AMP is what we call an activating group. Well, what does an activating group do? Well, let me come down here and redraw this in a way that is bigger so I can have more room. And I'm just going to put R prime right here. But just know that the R prime is essentially the phosphate with the rest of the adenosine. Okay. Well, let's look at this molecule. Let's look at it. I've got this carbon in the middle, and it's bound to what? It's bound to 2 oxygens. Well, the oxygens are very electronegative, right? So they're pulling electron density away, so they're going to have partial negative charges, right? And this carbon in the middle is going to have a partial positive, right? Because all the electron density is being pulled away from the carbon. So if you remember from your organic, things with partial positives or things with full positives are really susceptible to nucleophilic attack. Okay? So let's say I have a nucleophile. And nucleophiles have lone pairs, right? And again, in the context of biochemistry, this could really be anything. It doesn't have to be a certain thing. In the context of this particular reaction, it would be a coenzyme A, but we're just talking in general. And so what you've done by making this partial positive charge is you've made that carbon susceptible for a nucleophilic attack. And in the context of a carboxylic acid derivative like this is an ester or a phosphoester, you prime it for a nucleophilic acyl substitution. So this lone pair is going to attack here. The pi bond kicks up. The pi bond reforms, and you kick off whatever group is right there. So, for instance, if I did this reaction, right? If I continue this reaction, and we'll just put a generic nucleophile, right? A generic nucleophile. But if I put a nucleophile in here, right? Let me do it in a different color so you know what I'm talking about. If I put a nucleophile in here, it's going to hit this carbon, right? Pi bond kicks up, reforms, and it kicks off all this business. So nucleophile comes in, AMP goes bye-bye, and so what I'm left with is this. The R, or the alkyl chain, and the nucleophile. So what I've done essentially is I've activated the molecule, and then I'm easily able to do the next reaction. So what do I mean essentially by activating it? Well, what I'm doing is I'm raising it up in energy. And if you learned anything from your chemistries, it's that things that are high in energy are pretty easy to react. In fact, something like a thioester bond is very unstable. Certainly, phosphoester bonds are unstable as well. But in general, if I'm activating something, it means I'm raising it in energy and I'm making it unstable and more willing to react with things. In the context of this reaction, first I activated it with an AMP, and then I hit it with a nucleophile, and it was relatively easy for the nucleophile to hit it. And so now I raised it up in energy, and then I reacted it. And so essentially what we just did is what you did back in organic, right? You couldn't just react your carboxylic acid. You had to activate it first, and the way you did that was with thionyl chloride and pyridine. You made acetyl chloride. If you started with acetate, you made acetyl chloride, and then you could make whatever carboxylic acid derivative you wanted. So the key with activating groups is you're taking something that is relatively stable, making it very unstable, and then your enzymes can have their way with it, right? So first, in this case, AMP was the activating group. So I activate it, and then I can use the nucleophile to hit it. It might have been in this case that maybe if I start with this guy, right, the nucleophile couldn't just hit that carbonyl, right? It wasn't unstable enough. Carboxylic acids are fairly stable, so I have to activate it first. And so what goes on in organic happens in biochem as well. So it's really important to understand these activating groups because you'll see several of them. There's one in the TCA cycle. In fact, that's succinyl-CoA. They're just scattered throughout. They're scattered throughout different places, and it's important to understand this. So I hope this video helped you understand activating groups. In the next few videos, we'll actually look at fatty acyl coenzyme A synthetase, and we'll see that actually this reaction is essentially what fatty acyl coenzyme A synthetase is. See you in the next video.